Alright, so before we get on with today's video, it's the moment you guys have been waiting for. The winner of the giveaway will be announced. So I decided to do it as fair as I possibly could. I said if you comment on the video, you'll automatically be entered, and I will choose the winner at random. So I have a whole list of people right here, of everyone who commented on the video, and basically whoever's name is listed first on this random list generator is going to be declared the winner of the giveaway. And let's find out who won. So it seems the winner is Chibi. Congratulations, Chibi, for winning the giveaway. Comment on this video. Let me know what your Twitter and your Discord or whatever social media you use. I'd usually just tell you to hit me up and on my social media in the description, but I don't want there to be like an imposter trying to steal your reward from you. So confirm in the comment section below what your social media is, and I will message you the code. And I think that's how it should be done. So, sorry to those who entered that were, hoping to win, that didn't win, but I did it as fair as I could. So congratulations to Chibi. You'll get 3 free months of Xbox Game Pass. I decided I wanted to weigh in on the current debate going on in the video game community as to whether or not video games should be inclusive for everybody, for all types of players. And of course, this is specifically pertaining to games like Cuphead, Dark Souls, Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, games that are infamous for being incredibly difficult and grueling, and that's pretty much the whole premise of the game, is that it's hard and it's difficult. And there's no easy mode. There's only one difficulty mode, kind of like back in the day where games were really hard and you couldn't get around it by playing an easy mode. And you were either good at the game or you were bad at the game. If you were bad at the game, you weren't going to get all the content. And I have plenty of experience of playing games that were so hard that I couldn't beat them and I never finished them. So I never got to see how the game ended, I never got to see the story finished, and never got to figure out what happened at the end, and I never got all the content because the game was just too damn hard for me to beat. That really happened more so when I was in my younger years. There aren't too many games that I've bought over the past 5 or so years that I have not beaten. The one game I could think of that I haven't beaten yet was Zombie, which was a zombie survival game. It was originally on the Wii U, and then it was ported over to the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. I got it for free on the PS4, so I didn't put any money into it. But it was just, I didn't even think the game was good. So I wasn't going to punish myself to try to learn how the game worked, learn the mechanics, and beat the game eventually. Because I'm not a trophy hunter. I don't really care about beating games for bragging rights. Because let's face it, beating a video game is not a real-life accomplishment. I think people are way too overhyped when they beat a video game. Like it's something that people should actually care about, like it's an actual accomplishment that you made in your life. It's a video game, dude. Like, please try to put things into perspective here. If you are a grown-ass adult, an accomplishment in your life, at this stage in your life, would not be beating a video game. Getting Victory Royale in Fortnite, if you think that's a life accomplishment when you're 12, 13 years old, you don't have much else to go by, so I guess that's kind of acceptable. But if you're a grown adult, under no circumstances should you brag over the internet that you're better at a video game than somebody else. Like that's somehow meaningful in life. Like that's some kind of life accomplishment that actually means anything in the real world. You beat Sekiro 5 times already? That's great. Does that mean you're good at video games? Sure. But does that have any bearing in the real world? Absolutely not. Especially when we're talking about single-player games like Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, and Dark Souls, and Cuphead, where there's not even any competitive aspect to it. Sure, if it's a competitive multiplayer game and you're good at the game and you can maybe even like make money out of that by doing esports, then that's one thing, and these people make 7 figures a lot of the time. So that's a different scenario. But people who play single-player games thinking they're, beating the game, thinking they're good at video games, and just having bragging rights, thinking that it actually means anything at the end of the day, because it totally doesn't, especially when we're talking about single-player games. Because when that game is dead and no one cares about that game anymore, what does your skill in that game really mean? It's a single-player game. You can't put it to the test against anybody else. But even if we are talking about these esports players, and my opinion about esports and the esports community is well documented and not very popular, but I still stand by my opinion on esports that Well, for starters, they're not actual sports. And I know the name is electronic sports, but even putting it in the same category as real sports, real athletic sports like baseball, football, basketball, etc., is an absolute insult. Flicking a mouse across a pad is nowhere near the skill level that it takes to be able to be a successful NFL player, for example. It's just a different realm of existence. Just yesterday, some dude who runs some kind of business where he has like an esports training program where he puts people to their physical and mental limits to make them good esports players, and he trains them to be good at esports. This clown hopped into my Discord server yesterday, and because it's very recent, you can scroll back. I totally humiliated this person, and he actually left the server because I humiliated him so bad. I proved him completely wrong. Him saying that esports are actual sports and they should be taken seriously. Not saying that esports, and I'm not going to say esports anymore because that's an insult to real sports. Competitive gaming shouldn't be respected or shouldn't be spectated, and it's not a whole good thing. I recognize its place in the video game industry. I recognize its significance. However, just calling it a sport is completely wrong, and anyone who does so is living in a world of ignorance, in a world of make-believe, if you think people who flick a mouse across a pad should be put in the same category as real athletes. It's just totally stupid. At the end of the day, video games are supposed to be fun, they're supposed to be immersive, and sometimes difficulty, very high difficulty, can actually hinder that experience. If you're playing a game that is hard just for the difficulty and for the challenge, like Cuphead, for example, let me be straight with you. I do not think that Cuphead should have had an easy mode. I completely agree with people that believe that Cuphead was good the way it was because the whole premise of the game was that it's hard, and the whole game is that's the whole point of the game. That's the way developers intended for it to be. Kind of like an homage to the old days of the NES and Super Nintendo, where that was pretty much every game. They were incredibly hard. Some of them were very cheap, where beating the game really depended on luck more than anything else. Anyone who was around back then would know what I'm talking about. But people need to understand why it was the way that was back in the day. Okay, the video game industry has changed. You can't expect every game to be incredibly challenging and complain that these games are being dumbed down for filthy casuals, because the video game industry is different today than it was back in the day. The only reason why video games were notoriously hard back then is because that was really the only way that they could have replay value in those old games. Because back then, you couldn't save your game. Games were just as expensive back then as they are now. They did cost $50, $60, so adjusted for inflation, games were actually probably a little bit more expensive back then. But almost every game from back then was completely designed to give players a challenge, because they'd have to keep playing the game over and over again in order to beat it, because you lose your 3 lives, you start from the very beginning over and over again. And that's the whole point of having games like that. You eventually master it. Over time, you eventually are able to beat it. But overall, these games are only like 2 hours in length. So if that's all there is to it, you could just breeze through the game in one sitting. That wouldn't be good. That wouldn't be engaging. So that's why games were so hard back in the day. So if you're one of those old school gamers that are like, why are video games so easy these days? These filthy casuals are ruining gaming. Understand that the reason why games were difficult in the first place was because that was really the difficulty was the only tool they had to engage players and to add replay value to games. But now, with the advancement of technology, that's not necessarily the case, because you can actually have an experience, a gaming experience, that rivals that of a movie in terms of deep, engaging storytelling, good lore. Let's face it, games that were 8-bit and 16-bit, they couldn't have ever been as immersive as games are right now. They were basically a whole bunch of pixels on a screen. You can never be fully immersed in games like that. But games that are more realistic and have story and everything, and have the characters are actually talking to you on the screen, and sometimes you can make choices and determine who lives and who dies and all the other, the point I'm trying to make is that games can be engaging and challenging in other ways. Choosing the Brotherhood of Steel or the Institute in Fallout 4, choosing Ashley or Kaidan Lenko in Mass Effect 1, these are some choices that you make that are challenging, not necessarily from a gameplay difficulty level, but when it comes to actual, like, from a moral standpoint, making those difficult moral choices. because that alone is very difficult, especially if you're engaged in the story and engaged in the lore. But even games that don't necessarily have all those moral choices thrown at you, it's just a straight up game where you just play through the game completely, and you have difficulty options. Like for The Last of Us, for example, you have the really difficult mode, but you also have an easy mode. It really is the same experience. I know some, like, and that's the perfect example. If you're into that whole difficulty thing, then play the hard mode, right? But there should be an option for people who want to play this through the story, who just want to go through the game. And honestly, when it comes to difficulty, in a lot of ways, it can be unimmersive for me, and it could totally kill my mood and ruin my experience. Not necessarily because, oh my god, it's so hard and I don't like being challenged. Well, first of all, sometimes I just want to blow off steam, and I don't really care about just grinding the same mission over and over again and not being able to beat the mission and having to go through all that. I mean, every now and then I'm down for a challenge, especially when it comes to competitive online multiplayer games. But when it comes to single-player games, I usually never bother playing the highest difficulty because it doesn't mean anything at the end of the day. Oh, I beat The Last of Us on the highest difficulty. Okay, so when that game's dead, it doesn't mean anything. But when you play The Last of Us online and you get good at that against real people, then that's more of an accomplishment in my opinion. But here's the thing, though. I play video games mainly for two things: for relaxation and immersion, for just escaping, for escapism, for escaping from the real world and just immersing myself in a fictional universe for X amount of hours. Okay, so when I'm playing Fallout 4 on the highest difficulty setting, or even on any mode honestly higher than easy mode, it's not that I'm incapable of playing that game or I'm not skilled enough. It's two things. First of all, the game's already huge and massive and long. You really don't need to make it much longer by... And that's another thing. I feel like difficulty is a cheap way of making games longer, making them last longer. Instead of actually providing other means to actually engage people in the game, they do it where the game is hard, and that's the whole point of the game. Okay, so I understand there are people that are into that. Not really my thing, but every now and then I would like to try Super Meat Boy Cuphead every now and then. But when it comes to games like Fallout 4, for example, you already have so many hours into the game. You can do so many things. You could build settlements, and that's usually what I do. I build settlements, making those difficult choices, those dialogue choices, whether or not certain characters live or die, joining certain factions, destroying other factions. Those are difficult choices for me, and I feel like the game is already big enough. Time is a valuable resource, and I don't really need these high difficulty settings to get even more hours out of the game, because it's cheap. It's a cheap way of extending the longevity of the game, and it doesn't really add anything to the game. It's just repetitive. Like, you just have to keep grinding. And another thing I'm going to bring up, though, is I get completely unimmersed in the game when I'm playing on the highest difficulty, and this is what I was trying to get at earlier. I get so unimmersed when I'm shooting raiders or ghouls or whoever in the head 20 times and they're still alive. I hate that. I get totally unimmersed and it totally kills the mood for me, and I'm just like, really, what the hell? First-person shooters and RPGs don't really mix well. I really don't like first-person shooter RPGs that have a level rank progression system. I think it's just you're either good at it or you're not good at it. But I think when it comes to single-player first-person shooter RPGs, it feels more of a chore than anything else. It's like, why am I shooting this thing in the head 20,000 times and it's still alive? It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. So I get pissed off and I turn on easy mode, where a headshot is an instant kill. Or maybe I do play the game on a more difficult setting, let's say, but I download a mod where headshots are instant kill. I think that's fair. Because in other cases, when the game is just so hard and so grindy and so repetitive, it kills the mood for me sometimes, and I get unimmersed in the game. And look, when it comes to Sekiro, I think there should be an easy mode. I think there should be an easy mode when it comes to Dark Souls. I know a lot of people can be like, you filthy casual, get good. Oh my god, you people are so annoying. People that take video games way too seriously. And this is coming from someone that makes YouTube videos talking about video games. But my point still stands. You people take video games way too seriously, even more than I do sometimes. I really don't care about the games themselves. I care about the industry. And I think that these people out there that are all about get good at the game, bro, these people are just, honestly, sometimes they could be cancer. I think the opposite end of the extreme, though, is adding in skill-based matchmaking and doing all that. I think that's just as bad because it's kind of like an insult that they have to dumb down the game for you in order for you to get into it. And I hate that just as much as them making the game hard just to be hard. I hate those two things just as equally. Dumbing down the game completely to a point where there's no challenge whatsoever, where you're putting lobbies with people that suck. How the hell are you going to learn to be good at the game when you're just putting lobbies with people that aren't good at the game? Like, you need to learn from people that are good. Watch the kill cam, see what they're doing, how they're doing it, and that's really how you learn, is from observing. Not necessarily from playing with people that are just as bad as you. There's no way of learning. How are you going to get a black belt in karate if you keep fighting with people, training with people who only have white belts and never move up? It's just so stupid. It makes no sense. You got to train once in a while with someone that's just so far better than you, so far more advanced than you in their skill, that's how you learn. Skill-based matchmaking is also cancer. Don't get me wrong. I'm kind of like a moderate centrist when it comes to this whole debate, when it comes to difficulty. I think it's kind of stupid that Dark Souls, Sekiro, and all these From Software games don't have a difficulty option, because I know people are like, well, that's the whole point of the game. Well, I thought the game had a good story, it had good lore. Why should these people not be able to experience the entire game? Because they're not necessarily as good as video games as you are. It's just completely stupid that there should be a barrier of entry to experience the entire game, because someone is better than you, is better at the game than you are. It's just completely stupid in my opinion, and I think that game should have a difficulty setting. I don't think that Cuphead necessarily should, or even Super Meat Boy should have. I think there are certain games that are designed specifically for difficulty, but there are games like I said, from the From Software games that have solid gameplay, that have solid story, that have engaging deep lore. That why should you have to be amazing at the game in order to experience all of that? It's just beyond stupid. It's like if The Walking Dead, you had to be good at killing zombies in order to watch the season finale or something. I mean, probably a bad example, but it's just, you guys get what I'm saying. It's just this whole debate, both sides of this debate are kind of stupid. The people who think every game should be easy, and then the other people who think every game should be hard. I think there should be a middle ground, and that's my position.